The coffee pot slipped from Maya's trembling hands, shattering across the diner floor in a spray of glass and dark liquid. But she barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on the four men in black suits flanking the entrance, their presence transforming the humble Morning Glory diner into something that felt more like a courtroom. Behind them, two more men in expensive tailored clothing carried leather briefcases that probably cost more than her car. "Is there a Maya Chen here?" one of them called out, his voice cutting through the usual morning chatter like a blade. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. In the corner booth, the old man's seat sat empty for the first time in 3 years. The worn vinyl still held the impression of where he'd sat just yesterday, where he'd smiled at her with those kind, watery eyes and left his usual modest tip tucked under his coffee cup. She should have known something was wrong when he didn't show up this morning. 3 years earlier, Maya had been a different person. Fresh off a brutal divorce that had left her with nothing but debt and a 6-year-old daughter to raise, she'd taken the job at the Morning Glory out of desperation. It was the kind of place where the linoleum was cracked, the coffee was always a little burnt, and dreams came to die over plates of rubbery eggs and discount hash browns. The old man had first shuffled in on a Tuesday morning, moving with the careful deliberation of someone whose body had begun to betray them. He was thin, almost frail, with liver-spotted hands that shook slightly as he lowered himself into the corner booth. His clothes were clean but worn, the kind purchased decades ago and maintained with meticulous care because there was no money for replacements. Maya had served him without much thought that first day. A coffee, black, 2 eggs, scrambled, whole wheat toast, no butter. He ate slowly, methodically, making each bite last. She recognized the behavior. She'd done the same thing during her worst months, when each meal had to be stretched, savored, made to feel like more than it was. "Thank you, dear," he'd said when she refilled his coffee. His voice was soft, cultured, at odds with his shabby appearance. "You have a kind smile. That's rare these days." Something about the way he said it, the genuine warmth in his faded blue eyes, had cracked something open inside her. Maya had been so focused on survival, on keeping her head down and her daughter fed, that she'd forgotten what simple human kindness felt like. He came back the next day, and the day after that. Always the same order, always the same booth, always arriving at exactly 7:30 in the morning. His name was Walter, he eventually told her. Walter Thornton. He was 83 years old and lived alone in a small apartment a few blocks away. Their conversation started small, comments about the weather, observations about the other regulars. But gradually, over weeks and months, they deepened. Walter told her about his late wife, Eleanor, who had died 5 years ago after 60 years of marriage. He spoke of her with such tenderness that Maya sometimes had to blink back tears. "The hardest part," he said one morning, stirring his coffee with that same deliberate slowness, "isn't the big moments. It's the small ones. Making coffee for 2 out of habit. Reaching for her hand in the middle of the night and finding empty space. Wanting to tell her about something funny I saw, and then remembering." Maya found herself sharing things she'd never told anyone. About her ex-husband's affairs, about the shame of having to use food stamps to feed her daughter, about the crushing weight of feeling like a failure at 32. Walter listened with complete attention, never judging, never offering platitudes. He simply witnessed her pain and validated it with his presence. "You're not a failure," he told her firmly one morning. "You're a survivor. There's a difference. Survivors carry scars, yes, but they also carry strength." On particularly hard mornings, when Maya showed up with dark circles under her eyes because her daughter Emma had been up all night with an ear infection, Walter would quietly slip an extra $10 or $20 under his coffee cup. Maya always protested, but he would simply pat her hand and say, "Eleanor always believed in helping where help was needed. Let me honor her memory." The money helped more than he could know. It paid for Emma's medicine. It covered the gas bill when she was short. It bought her daughter new shoes when the old ones finally gave out. But more than the money, Walter gave Maya something she'd lost, hope. He told her about his life in fragments, like pieces of a puzzle she slowly assembled. He'd grown up poor during the Depression. He'd served in Korea. He'd worked as an accountant for 40 years, nothing glamorous, just steady work that paid the bills. He and Eleanor had never had children, something he spoke of with quiet regret. "We had each other, though," he said. "And that was enough." Until suddenly it wasn't enough, because she was gone. Maya began to think of Walter as the grandfather she'd never had. She saved the best pieces of pie for him. She learned how he liked his eggs cooked to perfection, not too runny but not too dry. She made sure his coffee was always hot and his water glass always full. When Emma had her 7th birthday, Maya couldn't afford much of a party. But she brought a cupcake to work, and Walter sang happy birthday with tears in his eyes. He gave Emma a worn copy of The Secret Garden that had belonged to Eleanor. Every child should have books, he said simply. Books are doorways to bigger worlds. Emma adored him. She started coming to the diner after school sometimes, doing her homework in Walter's booth while he helped her with math problems, his gnarled fingers pointing out numbers with patience her own father had never shown. Other waitresses thought Maya was wasting her time. He barely tips, one of them sniffed. Why do you bother? But they didn't understand. Walter tipped what he could, and it was the spirit behind it that mattered. Besides, he gave her something worth far more than money. He gave her dignity. He treated her like her work mattered, like she mattered. As the months turned into years, Maya began to notice changes. Walter moved more slowly. His hands shook more pronouncedly. Some mornings he seemed confused about what day it was. She started cutting his toast into smaller pieces without him asking. She made sure he took his time eating, never rushing him even when the diner was slammed. You're a good soul, Maya Chen, he told her one morning, about 6 months before everything changed. The world needs more people like you. I'm just doing my job, she said, embarrassed. No, he said firmly. You're doing far more than that. You're treating an invisible old man like he's visible. Like he matters. You have no idea how rare that is. 3 weeks before the lawyers walked in, Walter had seemed different. More contemplative. He asked Maya about her dreams. Dreams? She laughed bitterly. I don't have time for dreams. I have bills. But if you could do anything, he pressed. If money weren't an issue, what would you do? Maya had thought about it, surprised to find an answer emerging from somewhere deep inside, a place she'd locked away. I'd go back to school. I started studying to be a nurse before I got married. I was good at it. I liked helping people, making them feel better. But then, she trailed off. Then, life happened, Walter finished gently. It has a way of doing that. The next morning, he asked about Emma. About her dreams. She wants to be a doctor, Maya said, smiling despite herself. She's always patching up her stuffed animals, making little bandages out of tissues. She's so smart, Walter. So much smarter than I ever was. But college costs so much, and I don't know how. You'll find a way, Walter interrupted. Strong women like you and Emma always find a way. That was the last normal conversation they had. Because 2 days later, Walter didn't show up. For the first time in 3 years, the corner booth sat empty at 7:30. Maya tried to tell herself he was just sick, maybe sleeping in. But her stomach churned with worry all day. When he didn't show up the next morning either, Maya used her break to walk to his apartment building. The landlord, a gruff man named Carl, shook his head when she asked about him. Hospital, he said. Ambulance came yesterday afternoon. Heart attack, I think. Poor old guy. Never had any visitors, you know. No family. Kind of sad. Maya felt like she'd been punched. She got the hospital name from Carl and went straight there after her shift, still wearing her grease-stained uniform. But the nurses wouldn't tell her anything. She wasn't family. She went back every day for a week, bringing flowers she couldn't afford, hoping to see him. Finally, a sympathetic nurse pulled her aside. Mr. Thornton is asking for you, she said quietly. He keeps saying your name. I'll bend the rules, but only for a few minutes. Walter looked so small in the hospital bed, connected to machines that beeped and hummed. But his eyes lit up when he saw her. Maya, he whispered, I needed to see you one more time. You're going to be fine, she said, blinking back tears. You'll be back at the diner in no time. He smiled sadly. We both know that's not true. Listen to me, I need to tell you something important. About who I am, about what I've done. Walter, you should rest. Please, he said urgently, gripping her hand with surprising strength. I've been meaning to tell you for so long, but I was afraid. Afraid you'd treat me differently. Afraid I'd lose the one genuine human connection I've had in years. And then he told her a story that seemed impossible. About how he hadn't always been just an accountant. About a small investment he'd made in a friend's technology company in the 1980s, back when personal computers were a fantasy. About how that investment had grown exponentially. About the wealth he'd accumulated but never spent, not after Eleanor died, because money couldn't buy what he really wanted, purpose, connection, to matter to someone. I've been living like a poor man, he explained, because I wanted to know if anyone would care about me. Just me, not my money, not what I could give them. Just the person I am. Maya had felt dizzy, uncomprehending. But why? Because everyone wants something, he said, his voice breaking. After Eleanor died, people crawled out of the woodwork. Distant relatives I'd never met. Charities sending letters. Everyone had their hand out. I felt like a wallet, not a person. So I left it all behind. I wanted to live simply. To find out if anyone would see me. And you did, Maya whispered. I saw you, Walter. Emma saw you, not because of money, but because you're good and kind and you, he interrupted, you treated a shabby old man with dignity and grace. You shared your life with me. You let me be a part of your family. Do you know how precious that is? He'd made her promise to come back the next day. But when she arrived, his room was empty. A nurse told her he'd been moved to intensive care. That his heart was failing. That it wouldn't be long. Maya had sat in the waiting room for hours, praying to a God she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. She never got to say goodbye. Walter died that night, quietly, with only strangers around him. She'd wept for days, not just for his death, but for the unfairness of it all. That good people suffered, that a man who'd spent his life being generous and kind died alone. That she'd lost the closest thing to a father she'd ever had. Now, standing in the diner with broken coffee pot at her feet and these imposing men staring at her, Maya felt like she was living in a nightmare. I'm Maya Chen, she said, her voice barely steady. The lead attorney stepped forward, his expression unreadable. Ms. Chen, I'm Robert Davidson, senior partner at Davidson, Mills & Associates. I represent the estate of Walter Thornton. These gentlemen, he gestured to the bodyguards, are here for security purposes. Could we speak privately? Maya's boss, Joe, gestured to his office. Her legs felt like water as she walked. Emma. This was about Emma. Something about their friendship with Walter had gone wrong, and now she was in legal trouble. She was going to lose her daughter. Her mind spiraled through worst-case scenarios. Mr. Davidson opened his briefcase and pulled out documents. Official-looking papers with seals and signatures. Ms. Chen, I'm going to be direct because Mr. Thornton insisted we handle this quickly and without ceremony. Are you aware that Walter Thornton had a net worth of approximately $43 million? The room tilted. Maya gripped the edge of the desk. He said something in the hospital, but I thought he was confused. The medication, he was perfectly lucid, Mr. Davidson said. Mr. Thornton was an extremely shrewd investor. He lived modestly by choice, but his assets were substantial. Ms. Chen, Mr. Thornton left his entire estate to you and your daughter Emma. The full $43 million, plus property and investments. Maya couldn't breathe, couldn't think. This was impossible. There's a letter, Mr. Davidson continued, sliding an envelope across the desk. He insisted you read it immediately. With shaking hands, Maya opened it. Walter's handwriting, shaky but clear. My dearest Maya, if you're reading this, I've run out of tomorrows. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you this in person, but I was a coward, afraid that money would change the most genuine friendship I've had in decades. You saw me when I was invisible. You treated me with dignity when you had every reason to be bitter and hardened by life. You shared your precious daughter with a lonely old man and asked for nothing in return except kindness, which you gave in abundance. This money is not charity. It's payment for what you've already given me, purpose in my final years, laughter in my lonely mornings, and the feeling that I mattered. You made me feel human again. Use this to fulfill your dreams. Become that nurse you wanted to be. Send Emma to any college she chooses. Buy a home where you feel safe. Travel, live, be happy. That's all Eleanor and I ever wanted for ourselves, and it's what I want for you. You once told me you felt like a failure. Let me tell you what I saw. A woman of extraordinary strength and grace, who worked tirelessly to provide for her child, who never lost her capacity for kindness despite being shown cruelty, who chose to see the humanity in a shabby old man when others looked away. That's not failure, my dear. That's heroism. Take care of yourself and that beautiful little girl. Make the world kinder, the way you made my final years bearable. And sometimes, when you're drinking your morning coffee, remember the old man in the corner booth who loved you both like the family he never had. With all my gratitude and affection, Walter. Maya sobbed. Great, heaving sobs that shook her entire body. The lawyers waited patiently while she cried for Walter, for herself, for the impossible gift he'd given them. There are conditions, Mr. Davidson said gently when she'd composed herself. Only one, actually. Mr. Thornton established a foundation in his wife Eleanor's name. He's allocated $5 million to it, and he wants you to serve on the board. The foundation will provide assistance to single parents in need. Food, housing, education costs, whatever helps them get back on their feet. He said you'd know exactly how to help because you've lived it. Maya thought of all those mornings when Walter's extra $20 had meant the difference between keeping the lights on and sitting in the dark. She thought of every single parent she'd met who was drowning, trying to keep their head above water while the world pressed down. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll do it. The paperwork took weeks. The money, when it finally transferred, felt surreal. Maya kept working at the diner for another month, not because she had to, but because she needed time to adjust. To grieve. To plan. She enrolled in nursing school the following semester. Emma got a trust fund that would cover any college she chose. They bought a modest house, nothing fancy, because Maya remembered what Walter had taught her, that happiness didn't come from excess, but from purpose and connection. The Eleanor Thornton Foundation opened its doors 6 months later. Maya hired staff with lived experience, people who understood struggle intimately. They helped hundreds of families that first year, thousands in the years that followed. Every morning, Maya still woke up early. She made coffee in her new kitchen and sat at her table, looking at the framed photograph of Walter she'd asked the hospital for. In it, he was smiling, his eyes bright with the kindness that had defined him. "Thank you," she whispered to his image. "For seeing me, for reminding me that I mattered, for giving us a chance at a better life." But more than the money, more than the security and opportunities, Walter had given her something priceless, proof that small acts of kindness ripple outward in ways we can never fully measure. That treating someone with dignity and respect, regardless of their circumstances, is never wasted effort. That we're all just humans trying to matter, to be seen, to connect. Emma, now in medical school, volunteers at the foundation every summer. She tells applicants about her grandfather Walter, the man who wasn't related by blood but who showed them what family really meant. And sometimes, when Maya passes the Morning Glory Diner, she stops in. The corner booth is still there, worn vinyl and all. She sits in it, orders coffee black and scrambled eggs, and remembers the man who proved that wealth isn't measured in dollars but in the lives we touch and the love we share. Walter Thornton had been rich long before his lawyers walked through that door. He'd been rich in the ways that actually mattered, in kindness, in grace, in the quiet dignity of seeing and being seen. And through one exhausted waitress's simple choice to treat an old man with respect, he'd found the most valuable treasure of all, proof that even in a hard world, goodness exists. That we can be that goodness for each other. That we should be, because we never know whose life we're changing with our small acts of grace, or whose angels we're entertaining unaware.